Please, if the witnesses would take their seats. And if I may have the cameras out of the room, please. This is the 99th meeting of the Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. Famous number in Canadian hockey. Famous for Mr. Gretzky saying, go to where the puck's going to be, not where it is. So I'm sure Mr. Goodale is going to tell us where the puck is going to be on supplementary C's. So the number 99 of the Canadian government. Mr. Goodale, I'm sure you'll introduce your team.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Obviously pleased to have this opportunity once again to speak to this committee today, particularly about my portfolio's supplementary C estimates for 2017-2018, as well as our interim estimates for 2018-2019. And I would be remiss if I didn't also include a few brief remarks about some significant new investments that were announced this week in Budget 2018. The team, Mr. Chair, includes Deputy Minister Malcolm Brown, that the committee is very familiar with. The President of CBSA, John Osowski, is with us once again. Dan Dubeau, the Acting Commissioner of the RCMP, and Dan will have appeared before this committee in a number of capacities over a great many years, but I would note that today may or may not be one of his final appearances. He has been serving as the acting commissioner since last summer, about an 8-month period, I believe. A tremendously important, difficult challenge, which he has discharged with great skill and ability. And Dan, thank you very much for your service over many years in the RCMP. Karen Robertson is here, Deputy Director of Administration and the Chief Financial Officer of CSIS. Ann Kelly is with us once again, representing the Correctional Service of Canada, previously as Assistant Commissioner, now as Acting Commissioner, newly installed, replacing Don Head, who retired a few weeks ago, and Ann is assuming the top responsibilities in the CSC while the search process goes forward for the new commissioner. And finally, Jennifer Oates, who has just been appointed as the new chairperson of the Parole Board of Canada, replacing Harvey Senenko. So you have a team that's partly been here before and partly brand new, and we're glad to have the opportunity to present today. And as usual, our priority is keeping Canadians safe while simultaneously safeguarding rights and freedoms. And that's why I was so pleased with a number of elements in the budget last Tuesday, because it includes significant investments that will advance both of these objectives. Some of those initiatives over the next 5 years include $507 million for Canada's first comprehensive cybersecurity plan, over $50 million in research and treatment for post-traumatic stress injuries among public safety officers, $33 million to help border officers stem the flow of opioids into Canada, $14.5 million to set up a hotline for victims of human trafficking to access the help that they need, $20.4 million in mental health supports for women in correctional facilities, over a third of whom are Indigenous, $173 million to ensure that we can continue to securely and effectively process asylum seekers in accordance with Canadian law and all of our international obligations, and $4.3 million to reopen penitentiary farms at Joyceville and Collins Bay correctional institutions. This was a valuable program that was unfortunately shut down between 2009 and 2011. There has been very substantial community support for reinstating the farms near Kingston, and I look forward to showing what they can achieve for rehabilitation of offenders and therefore better public safety. I look forward, Mr. Chair, to returning to this committee in the future with funding details related to all of these issues. But for now, let me just turn to the estimates before us and use the remaining time to discuss some of the highlights. To start with, we are upholding our commitment from last year's budget to establish a grant program beginning in 2018-19 to support the families of first responders who fall in the line of duty. The Memorial Grant Program for First Responders will provide a lump sum tax-free direct payment of up to $300,000 to the families of police officers, firefighters, and paramedics who die as a result of their duties. And the effective date for that program is April the 1st. That includes volunteers, auxiliary members, and reservists. In the coming year, we'll be seeking $21.9 million for this important new grant program. Supporting the families of public safety officers is the least we can do when their loved ones lose their lives, protecting all of the rest of us. We also have to ensure that the brave women and men who keep our communities safe have the resources they need to do their tough jobs. To that end, we are seeking $70 million through the Supplementary Estimate C in program integrity funding for the RCMP. And I would note that this week's budget includes an additional $80 million for the RCMP in the coming year. We are providing this funding as we undertake an integrity review of the force to ensure the RCMP have the resources they need and have them where Canadians need them. On a similar note, the CSE, the Correctional Service of Canada, is requesting a funding increase to maintain operations that were affected by budget cuts in 2014. As you may recall, that budget imposed an operating freeze for fiscal years 2014-2015 and 2015-2016 on all departments. During that period, departments were not funded for increases in salary expenditures resulting from collective agreements and the ongoing impact of those adjustments. Financial implications from the collective agreements process amount to $105.7 million for fiscal year 2017-2018. So that is what the Correctional Service of Canada is now seeking to cover that shortfall. Supplementary Estimate C also include a request for $144 million related to security for Canada's presidency of the G7, including hosting the Leaders Summit in Charlevoix this spring. Security operations include advanced planning and preparations well in advance, including site visits, scenario developments, and risk assessments. I know the RCMP is working with the community to ensure that residents are properly informed and to ensure that the security of participants and the public is properly protected. Mr. Paulus, I know you have a request outstanding for the appropriate briefing for you with respect to these security arrangements, and we will make sure that that information is provided to you. Also, while it is not technically funded within my portfolio, I would want to note that the new multi-party National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians is now up and running, and these estimates include $2 million for the Privy Council office to support the establishment of the committee's secretariat. And I have heard anecdotally from a variety of members on that committee that they are pleased with the way it has started its work. And I certainly look forward to the good work that NACICOP will do. There is much more that I would like to discuss this morning. But to close my remarks, let me just focus in on two particular points with respect to Bill C-59, the national security legislation, which is moving closer to clause-by-clause consideration. One of those points is this. There is, I believe, a drafting error that has come to our attention, and it has to do with CSIS querying the data sets in exigent circumstances when they are properly authorized to do so by the director. The threshold in the legislation as drafted says that such a search could be conducted if it would, in fact, provide the desired intelligence. And of course, you can't know that with 100% certainty in advance. So we would propose a change in the language that would talk about a threshold of likely to produce. That would enable CSIS to perform the queries in exigent circumstances. And of course, all of that is scrutinized after the fact by the new National Security and Intelligence Review Agency. The second matter relates to testimony that I read regarding ministerial directives on information sharing. And as you know, I released those MDs last fall for the first time. Some of your witnesses expressed an interest in having a legal requirement that the ministerial directives be made public. And I think it is an excellent idea, and I would encourage members of the committee to consider making that change in the legislation. Mr. Chair, my officials and I are proud of the important work that we all, and when I say all, I mean to include the vigilant members of this committee, that we all continue to do to ensure the security and safety of Canadians, and we're happy to try to address your questions pertaining to the estimates.
Thank you, Minister Goodale. First, for 7 minutes, Ms. Damoff.
Thank you very much, Chair. And Minister, thank you for being with us again, and all of your officials, not only for being here, but for the fine work that you do for our country. It's much appreciated. I'm guessing you can probably have some idea about what my question will be, because I usually ask you about this when you come to committee. But as you know, our public safety officers risk their mental health when they come to work every day. And it's something that this committee has been seized with in terms of their report that was unanimous, or our report that was unanimous. And it's certainly something I've been seized with since I was elected. And so I was quite excited when I read the budget to see that there was $20 million going into funding to support our public safety officers' mental health. And Minister, I first want to thank you, because I know that that's something that you personally have been working on since you were first appointed. And I wondered if you could speak about, just a little bit about the importance of the work that's going to be done. I realize it's not in the estimates, but it is something that we've talked about a great deal here at committee.
It's a very, very important field of public policy, Ms. Damoff. You point out the very good work that was done by this committee and the report that was drafted, and I know you had a very strong hand in doing that. There have been motions on this topic that have been presented in the House of Commons. I presented one in the opposition 4 or 5 years ago, and Mr. Doherty from the opposition, and I hope he's recovering well from his illness, has presented one as well. I think this is an issue that completely transcends any partisan considerations. We all share the earnest desire that our public safety officers, who put themselves in harm's way to defend the rest of us, and in the course of what they do, they are exposed to some very tough situations and some pretty awful things that they have to see. And it takes a toll. PTSI and other conditions are very likely to result from what they are called upon to do in discharging their official functions. And the statistics indicate very clearly what the toll is. What we have provided in the budget, working with the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, as well as the Canadian Institute for Public Safety Research and Treatment, the shorthand is CIPSRT, as well as my Department of Public Safety, is to make sure that we've got the knowledge, the intelligence, the research in place to fully understand PTSI among first responders and public safety officers. We think we know it pretty well among Canadian Forces personnel and veterans, but first responders have pointed out that some of their circumstances are different. It might appear to be the same thing, but it's important to understand the nuances and the distinctions when PTSI affects public service officers, public safety officers. So we are putting forward the funding for the research and the analytical work that needs to be done. And then in addition to that, there's a further $10 million to go toward the online provision of services. As you know, some of these people are called upon to operate in remote locations. They don't have access to some of the services and facilities that are available in our more urban locations. So they need to be able to access the treatment that they require in various forms, including online. So the money is there for that purpose, to do the research, collect the data and the knowledge, do the analysis, and provide the treatment facilities. It's $30 million in total over a 5-year period. But I must say, of all the things that affect my department coming from the budget, and I listed quite a long list at the beginning, this is the one that has prompted the largest response. The no-fly list with respect to children is a very close second. So the two of those have prompted a very big reaction. But there's obviously a lot of Canadian support for making sure our public safety officers are properly treated from a mental health and mental health care perspective.
Well, it's often, as you know, Minister, often something that's taken for granted in terms of keeping Canadians safe, and so it's critical. And I too have heard a number of comments from public safety officers and are extremely grateful. In my limited time that I have left, one of the things that we heard at Status of Women Committee was about the fact that marginalized women often are hesitant to come to the RCMP or the police, in particular Indigenous women, other marginalized groups, because of perceptions that they will that they won't be treated as well as they should be when they come forward. I mean, it's one of the recommendations that we made was actually for better training for federally regulated law enforcement officers in dealing with people who do come forward respectfully. And so you've committed $2.4 million over 5 years, as well as ongoing funding to the RCMP for cultural competency training. Again, a recommendation that we're seeing in the budget that we were quite pleased about. I wonder if you could just speak about the importance of that and how it will make a difference for Indigenous women in particular who are coming forward with complaints.
I would actually love on a further occasion to give the mic on this one to Acting Commissioner Dubeau. The force has taken this issue very, very seriously. There are a number of initiatives that they are engaged in now that you'll see rolling forward in the course of the next number of weeks and months, dealing with the whole issue of reconciliation, better communication, better training and sensitivity issues. It's an issue the force has as a great priority in its training and in its operations. All Canadians need to know and need to believe and need to be able to believe that when they approach their national police force, they will be treated in an exemplary manner. And that is the force's ambition very much. I would also note, and happy to answer questions about how they are working on that unfounded category of sexual assault investigations. That's another area where they've really set the pace in terms of how to address that issue.
Thank you, Ms. Damoff. Thank you, Minister. Mr. Palouse, 7 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to take this opportunity to say how the official opposition and the Conservative Party recognize the services provided by our security services being one of the best in the world. Mr. Minister, I have a question for you. The procedures is there any information with respect to the meetings held by the Prime Minister and his officials?
The sound disappeared on me. If you would mind just repeating that one.
Oui, Monsieur le Ministre.
I'd like to know if you're open to having officials come here to testify before the committee with respect to the procedures surrounding the Prime Minister when he's invited abroad.
Supplementary estimates, there's pretty broad opportunity to ask questions, but if members could, by some means or another, tie it to supplementary estimates, it's a legitimate question, but by some means to supplementary estimates or the main estimates.
Mr. Chair, as I understand it, the committee is the master of their own procedure, determining what's to be on the agenda and what's not, and what issues to pursue, and so forth. My officials, by my recollection, have been very forthcoming in being available to the committee to respond to whatever the committee sets as the committee's agenda. But the committee is the master of its own procedure. The one caveat that I would apply, Mr. Paulus, and I know with your distinguished military background, this will be no surprise, that on the floor of the House of Commons or in a standing committee of the House, representatives of the government cannot discuss classified material. That is not a part of our process. There are procedures by which that material can be reviewed and examined elsewhere, but not in a standing committee.
Merci, Monsieur le ministre. Donc, Monsieur le
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I'd like to table a motion that pursuant to Standing Ordering 102, the committee hold a briefing with the National Security Advisor about the question whether the previous had the possibility to told that convicted terrorist Jasper Inwell's invitation before he participated in the meeting, that the committee formulate recommendations and present its findings to the House. I would also encourage all the members of the committee to vote on the motion. I hope that the Liberals will not ask that this be adjourned for the moment.
Is timely. And is it being presented with the second motion as well? The two motions together? Just the one motion. Let's debate. Michel Picard.
Président, je demande que le débat soit ajourné.
So a recorded vote, please.
Okay. Ready for that? Those in favor of the motion?
Move to adjourn the debate.
I just moved to adjourn the motion, the debate.
It's non-debatable.
Ms. Abruzin?
On adjourning the debate? Yes.
Ms. Damoff?
Yes.
Mr. Fragiscados? Yes. Mr. Picard? Mr. Spangeman?
Oui.
Mr. Calkins?
No.
Mr. Motz?
No.
Monsieur Paulus?
No.
Monsieur Dubé?
No.
5 in favor, 4 against.
Motion's lost. Motion passed.
Donc, Monsieur le Président, j'aimerais déposer une
So I'd like to table a second motion that pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee hold a briefing with National Security Advisor Daniel Jean to testify and fully explain why and how reporters were told that convicted terrorist Jasper Atwell's invitation was facilitated by elements within the Indian government, and that the committee make recommendations and report its findings to the House. And I would encourage all members to vote on the motion, and I hope that the Liberals will not move that we adjourn the debate.
Mr. Spangeman.
Mr. Chair, I move that the debate now be adjourned.
Ms. Abruzin?
Yes.
Ms. Damoff?
Yes.
Mr. Fragiscados?
Yes.
Mr. Picard?
Yes.
Mr. Spangeman?
Yes.
Mr. Calkins?
No.
Mr. Motz?
No.
Monsieur Paulus?
No.
Monsieur Dubé?
No.
5 in favor, 4 against.
You have about 2 minutes left in your time.
Mon temps avait arrêté lorsque j'ai déposé mes
When I tabled the motion, did you stop my time?
All right. Monsieur le Ministre,
Minister? The intelligence services, did CISA see the guest list for the event organized on February 22nd?
No direct knowledge of that matter at the moment. I'll inquire and find out.
OK. Donc, Monsieur le ministre,
All right, Minister, you are in charge of public security. Do these matters come under your jurisdiction? Normally, would you be responsible for overseeing this?
The matters related to VIP security issues are under the purview and authority of the Privy Council office, and that is actually where the question should be directed, Mr. Paulus. I would, though, add this caveat that, as you know from my answers on other issues on other occasions, I don't wade into operational discussions because that is not in the best interest of Canada. But I also observe that there is a process by which members of Parliament can pursue these issues. But it's not appropriate in a standing committee.
donc,
Thank you, Mr. Paulus. Unfortunately, your time has run out. Mr. Dubé, 7 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
How we often have our differences and some robust debate in this setting. I do want to thank you for the money that's going towards the redress system for after the advocacy of the no-fly list kids. I think that's something very important, and certainly we have. We will wait and see. The devil's in the details, as they say. But at the same time, I think on that we can agree, and I will share my appreciation for that. J'ai quelques questions que j'aimerais vous poser.
My first question to you, you talked about the G7 meeting, and I don't know if I know that my colleague Karen Trudel sent you a letter to find out how the municipalities in Saguenay will be supported, given that many leaders, including the U.S. president, are going to be landing in Bagotville, and some GS guests are going to have to be accommodated in the Saguenay region, given the limited space available in Charlevoix. So could you explain how the municipalities will be supported so that they don't end up having to foot a very heavy bill at the end of the process?
Thanks, first of all, for your comments about the Passenger Protect program and the changes that we're making there. And with respect to Charlevoix, security, the G7, as you will understand, this is a very complex and detailed operation. I mentioned in my remarks that Mr. Paulus had asked for a briefing with respect to all of the details, and certainly that same briefing can be made available to you to ensure that you're properly informed about all of the arrangements that will be put in place. These events are big, and they have disruptive impacts in the local communities in which they are held. We want to make sure that is properly addressed, and I will make every effort to respond in detail to the letter from Mr. Trudel. I haven't actually seen it personally yet, but I will be following up.
Fair enough. Thank you. I don't want to take away anything from the work that the interim commissioner, Mr. Dubois, has done, but you'll understand that there's people are wondering where the process is in finding the new permanent commissioner. It has been a fairly long period of time now, and there are a lot of issues on the table that need to be dealt with, in particular some labor issues and issues related to sexual harassment, among other things, where we're looking to see what kind of direction the new commissioner will put in place. Is there anything you can tell this committee about where that process is currently?
It is very well advanced. The search process involved a professional, independent human resources search firm of very high caliber, and then a selection and interview and analysis process that was conducted over the last several months, led by former New Brunswick Premier Frank McKenna. members of his committee, I think, are known to members of this committee, but I would be happy to provide you with a full list of all of those
Line that you can provide to the committee?
very shortly.
Okay.
Mr. Dubé, I think it can be measured in, well, very shortly.
Okay. We'll look forward to that with great interest. The other question on the other timeline I wanted to ask, and I imagine I'll get similar diplomatic responses, but for the cybersecurity legislation that's mentioned in Tuesday's budget, what kind of timeline is being envisioned for that? Because there are significant changes. As you know, the committee is currently dealing with a significant piece of legislation. What kind of timeline is being looked at for that?
I would very much like to have that legislation before Parliament this year, given the parliamentary timetable this spring. I'm not sure we can get it there before the House rises in June. But I would definitely want to see the legislation before the House as quickly as possible. Understand that there are a number of things that are feeding into this process of a national cybersecurity strategy. Bill C-59 is part of that, as you will have observed, Mr. Dubé. The National Defense Review has been part of that process. There is a significant contribution to be made by Shared Services Canada, and you will note an item in the budget over and above the $507 million that relates to cyber and Shared Services Canada. There is a contribution also to be made by ICED on the science and innovation side of it.
Because my time is limited, the budget does talk about sort of putting everyone under one roof, and it's as part of the discussion around C-59, we had the Deputy Chief of CSC talking about the sharing of capabilities with the military that's developing their own cyber capabilities, and this whole debate around active cyber operations. So what does it mean to have everyone under the same roof? Does that mean that we could have CSC as a civilian organization doing work alongside the armed forces with their capabilities and the sharing that's going on currently? Would that be creating this legal framework where everyone's essentially operating under the same roof, or are you just going to tell me to wait for that legislation?
Well, we want to get the efficiencies and the synergies that come from all of the expertise being co-located in a way in which they can mutually reinforce each other. At the same time, we want to make sure that Canadians feel that this center and the expertise within that center is accessible to them and hospitable toward them, and that is of service to them. So that is the balance we're trying to achieve, Mr. Dubé, to avoid having 4 or 5 different centers of expertise divided up across the government, to pull all of that together, but to have it accessible to all Canadians, not just the military. And that's the balance we want to achieve.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Dubé. Mr. Fragiscatos, 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister, for being here. Thank you to all the officials as well. Minister, as you know, in recent, actually less than 2 weeks ago, it was about a week and a half ago now, in southwestern Ontario, there were very serious flooding situations in the community of Brantford and Chatham as well. Both declared a state of emergency. I represent part of London, Ontario in Parliament. Brantford's just down the road, as is Chatham. I notice in the estimates here that there is funding for the Government Operations Centre. I think when most Canadians, however, hear something like that, Government Operations Centre, they think of, I don't know what they think of, perhaps bureaucracy, they think of something that is just out of their reach and perhaps not intelligible. Can you tell the committee and Canadians, in effect, how critical the Government Operations Centre is in situations of national emergency, what exactly it does, how it works with the province and with municipalities that have declared situations of emergency?
The GOC is a little-known agency within the Department of Public Safety, but it's an extremely important one. It's there to provide constant 24/7, 365 awareness on the part of the Government of Canada of any significant event that may require a response from the Government of Canada. So its first job is simply to be in touch with everything that's happening across the country and make sure that, to a maximum extent humanly possible, nothing pops out of the blue as a total surprise. Oh, we haven't heard of the flood. That is the sort of thing you definitely want to avoid. The GOC then has the capacity to bring all of the federal family together, every department and agency of the Government of Canada that could be relevant to that situation, and make sure that they are ready if they are called upon. They also have the ability to reach out to provinces, territories, municipalities, the private sector, Indigenous organizations, auxiliary groups like the Red Cross and so forth, so that as a situation is developing and perhaps getting more serious, you have all of the relevant players quite literally in the same room.
So therefore, I think it's fair to say that a silo effect is avoided in this situation. Right?
That is exactly the objective. Now, in the case of the floods, the situation in Ontario in the last week or so, the Government Operations Centre was very aware of everything that was happening locally on the ground, and was communicating with Ontario officials to say, we're in touch. If you need anything, if you have to submit a request for assistance from the Government of Canada, if the local situation surpasses your ability to cope with it, we're here and we will respond instantly.
Well, that
didn't happen in that case. At least it hasn't happened yet. The flood season is just beginning, but we're on standby.
That was my next question, so I'll move on to asking you about the RCMP. Clearly, the estimates make a number of projections with respect to spending. You mentioned this in your opening remarks. London, Ontario, in fact, London North Centre is home to the Ontario headquarters of the RCMP. Can you go into further details about how this money will be used, how it will help the RCMP in the conduct of its operations?
The RCMP has faced, over the last number of years, a very significant challenge in that the workload on the force has been constantly increasing, while their resource base has been constantly decreasing. Between 2010 and 2015, something very close to $500 million was withdrawn from the base funding of the RCMP. So when you have a workload going up, the budget allocations going down, you put the force in a pretty invidious position. You may remember when the crisis happened on Parliament Hill in the fall of 2014, Commissioner Paulson at that time had to reassign something like 600 officers in the space of just a couple of days. So they were pulled off of organized crime investigations, drug investigations, border issues, and so forth, and they were brought to deal with what was then a very urgent national security crisis. We can't have the force in the position of constantly having robbing Peter to pay Paul. So an analysis has been ongoing for the last number of years involving Treasury Board and the RCMP and the Public Safety Department and external financial consultants and advisors to assess the resources available to the RCMP compared to what they're being asked to do in their mandate, and trying to bring those two things together. The funding in the estimates is to address the first portion of a solution. As I said, there's another item in the budget that will take another step toward that. What's going on here is a full program integrity assessment to make sure that we're providing the RCMP with what they need to do the job that Canadians ask them to do.
Thank you very much. In the time I'm sensing I have limited time, so I will say one quick point, but it's a very important one. Zamir Khan and Heather Harder are Londoners. Their child has been negatively impacted by the no-fly list. I know that they and many other Canadians look forward to seeing what will happen with respect to the funding that has been allocated, how it will be used. I'm hopeful and I'm encouraged. I want to thank you for taking this item, this issue, I should say, extremely seriously into your entire department, because I know it's been top of mind for this family and, as I say, so many others across the country.
I think I bumped into them on the Hill on Tuesday. And
I'm sure you did.
later in the afternoon, they seemed to be quite happy. So we intend to try to keep it that way.
Thank you, Mr. Fragiskatos. Mr. Calkins, 5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister, for being here. I want to follow up with one question after my colleague, just to see if I can get an answer. Did the RCMP, to your knowledge, Minister, given the fact that we're spending you're asking for $17 million in the supplementary estimates for major international event security costs, did the RCMP see the guest list prepared by the Prime Minister's office for the event hosted by the Canadian High Commissioner on Thursday, February 22nd?
Mr. Calkins, the item with respect to international events pertains to things like the G7.
That's an answer to the question, but it's not an answer to my question, Mr. Minister. My question was very specific about events pertaining to February 22nd.
Again, I will make some inquiries and determine the answer.
Well, I don't know why you can't answer the question here, Minister. You seem to have an answer in question period for these very basic questions, and it doesn't seem to be satisfactory. Minister, you should be aware, I mean, you're a veteran here at this House, as am I. You're aware that when a minister or the Prime Minister travels to a foreign country, that Global Affairs desk in that country would have a guest list for a mission event in which the Prime Minister or Minister would attend. You would be aware of that. And once that list has been compiled by that mission, you would know that the vetting process that mission would undertake involves the geographical and security desks involved at Global Affairs Canada, which involves the people from the organizations who are sitting around you at this table. Do you honestly expect us to believe that the mission staff, in coordination with Global Affairs counterparts, would not have significant information in regards to invited attendees concerning security concerns and matters that might affect the national interest or Canada's reputation globally?
Mr. Calkins, I appreciate your keen interest in this subject matter. But once again, you're asking us to discuss here operational issues that bear upon national security. There is a place and a forum where that can be examined, but it's not a standing committee of the House.
Well, with all due respect, my job as a parliamentarian is to hold the government to account, and the Prime Minister is asking me to believe a story that the government of India is responsible for a security breach in an event that actually happened in his presence. So far, we've got conflicting stories from a Canadian citizen who is a convicted attempted murderer and has been identified with a terrorist organization, who was at an event not only with the Prime Minister, but is seen in photographs with the Prime Minister's wife in a foreign country, of which a serious diplomatic incident has been erased. You expect us to believe that the Prime Minister's story, that he was advised by someone in your department or in your agency or in the Privy Council office who would have a significant knowledge about this, is laying the blame at the foot of the Indian government, which the Indian government refutes at every angle. So, Mr. Minister, I'm asking you for some clarity on this. Canadians have a right to know. This affects our country's reputation. This affects our image. This affects our trade. And Canadians have every right to know. And you've told me that I have another forum that I can find out this information, yet you haven't told me what that forum is. So could you please just explain it here to this committee, because this committee is tasked with the oversight of the money that you're spending through your department on behalf of taxpayers to make sure incidents like the one we're talking about doesn't happen.
Members that we are studying estimates, and I appreciate that relevance is a loose concept, but nevertheless, if we can tie our questions in some manner or another to the estimates, that would be helpful.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Just by the nature of the way Mr. Calkins phrased himself there, you can see, Mr. Chair and Mr. Calkins, how quickly your line of questioning gets to classified information. And by my oath of office, I am not permitted to deal in public with classified information. That was a problem in the accountability structures of our parliamentary system. But we took steps with the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians to address that issue, to provide a forum within which issues that involve classified information can in fact be dealt with by members of Parliament more than just those who are sworn to the Privy Council.
Mr. Minister, we haven't asked you to actually divulge classified information. We're simply asking you, were you advised? Did the RCMP or did CSIS actually advise the Prime Minister's office or the Privy Council office on this matter?
That was the phrasing of your opening question,
that's a
but
yes
your
or no
second question then got into an analysis of
your answer to my
intelligence
first question.
interpretations of Canada versus another country. That is classified information, and there I cannot go in a standing committee.
I'm sorry, we're almost out of time. You still have 10 seconds. But, Mr. Spingwin, 5 minutes.
Sure, thank you very much, Minister. Great to have you back with your team. I wanted to, first of all, echo my colleagues, Mr. Fragascados, and also my colleague from the NDP, Mr. Dubé, and thank you for the appropriation for the creation of the database, the Passenger Protect program, $81.4 million over 5 years. I wonder if you could take a moment just to explain to the committee and to Canadians the logic of this appropriation or this budgetary item in relation to C-59, and address those who say there should either be no no-fly list or it would be faster, if not sufficient, to have the airlines deal with it.
The fact that the airlines have been dealing with it for the last decade or so is in fact right at the root of the problem. Most no-fly list systems that are set up around the world are standalone government systems where the government maintains the list, the airlines supply the manifests, and the government checks to see if any of those names set up a red flag on the government list. And they have built right into them an interactive mechanism where if a red flag comes up once and it's a false positive, then the person who triggered that false positive can be given a clearance number, and every time they go to get their boarding pass thereafter, they enter that clearance number and they're automatically passed through the system. It has to be interactive and totally automated. If the government sets up the system, you can design it that way. If the airlines are asked to run the system, then you have to kind of piggyback onto their system and tailor-make the security arrangements to suit the airline manifests. That's backwards. We need to turn it around, and that's what this money will allow us to do. There are three things that are required. We need to get the legal authority to deal with this private information. The authority to do that is in Bill C-59. We will need to adopt new regulations, which we will work on as soon as we get the legislation passed. And then you have to build this new computer system from the ground up. That's where the largest bulk of the money will go, and the architect of that will largely be CBSA, obviously in conjunction with Transport Canada, because they have a very important role too.
Thanks very much for that. And again, my thanks, and I think I'll be echoed by all those who have constituents that are affected by the current state of the system. Minister, there's a voted appropriation of $1 million for an item that we've had a chance to talk about before. It's the Security Infrastructure Program, or SIP. In my hometown of Mississauga, we have a fairly active faith leaders dialogue at the moment, and there's interest in this program, and I think there have been applications, and I wonder if you could just take a moment to update the committee on how it's evolving and what that $1 million will be spent on.
It's evolving very well, but we're oversubscribed. Obviously, when we modified the program a year and a half ago to make the terms of reference more inclusive and to better publicize the program and to have 2 regular periods every year when we can intake applications, all of that has served to identify a significant need in communities that feel vulnerable, and the demand has gone up significantly. We are working very hard to try to respond to all of that, to make sure that we, in every one of the intakes, process as many of the applications as we possibly can, and give local religious organizations and community organizations the kind of reassurance that they need, that they will have the physical structures necessary to keep them and their communities safe.
Thanks very much. I have less than a minute left. Closely related in logic to the Security Infrastructure Program, which seeks to protect constituents, communities from violence, is the Community Resilience Fund, which works actively against the creation of violence or the phenomenon of violence. I wonder if you could just very briefly comment on the state of affairs with respect to that fund.
That is a relatively new fund. It's in the Canada Centre for Community Engagement and Prevention of Violence. The whole idea here is to work with community organizations to assist them in developing locally based activities that deter radicalization to violence. We have found that it's not a case of one size fits all across the country. There are a vast array of circumstances that we have to be prepared for. So at the national level, we are supporting research and we're supporting organizations that will work at the local level to reach out to vulnerable communities and provide them with the tools to identify problems early while you still have an opportunity to head off circumstances before tragedy results.
Thank you, Mr. Spingaman. Thank you, Minister. Mr. Motts, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister and staff, for being here. I'm wondering, I'm going to ask some questions that I know are not classified information. I'm just curious to know, Mr. Minister, when the last time that media was given a phone briefing by a unidentified security agent?
I am not privy to that information, Mr. Mott. I can try to make some inquiries to find out, but certainly that's not something that's within my purview or jurisdiction.
Because I can't find, no one that I know can find any information of any history ever where a security advisor gave briefings to the media over the telephone. So what I find, and the Canadians find actually quite unfortunate, is that your government is willing to make high-level security officials available in secretive background briefings with reporters, but you're refusing to make them available to answer questions here to this committee, to parliamentarians. I'm curious to know how that can be.
Mr. Mott, my issue is one of respecting, as I am required by law, to respect the confidentiality of classified information. Let me just make this observation. Over the last 40 or 45 years, I've had the opportunity to watch and work with a lot of very senior public servants. And I've done that both from the opposition side and from the government side. And I have found that they work very hard to be impartial, to be nonpartisan, to be utterly professional in what they do.
And Minister, I have limited time. I appreciate that
this point is really important.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
What they're motivated by, is defending Canada's national interests.
Mr. Minister, those issues are not about whether our public service, those security officials do their job and do it well. You will never get an argument on this side of the House about that. That's not the issue. The issue is that they were provided, the media was provided with information that alleged a conspiracy by the Indian government. And when we, as parliamentarians, want to inquire about that, that information was already given to the media. I don't understand why it can't be given to us. That was my question. Not whether or not these public servants are doing their job well. That's what I don't understand. So obviously, we're not going to get a response to that. I guess in my limited time that I have left,
I keep saying to members that there has to be some relevance to the estimates. So if you could tie it in by some means or another.
Well, and I will. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for that gentle reminder. Yes, but not to me, my first.
No.
So I see in the estimates that, of course, a lot of money is spent on working with our foreign partners on identifying threats. And I'm curious to know, given what's happened with the allegation of the conspiracy theory recently in India, has our relationship with India changed in that? Has Canada now changing their given the comments made by officials from our own PM's office that he was set up, Has India been now considered to be a hostile country? Is their threat level now changed toward Canada?
Mr. Mott, I simply look at what's available on the public record with respect to this matter, and I see a headline from last Saturday's Times of India that says, quote, "Canada's tough stand on terror soothes India." I see a major anchor on Indian television referring to this same matter with respect to terrorism, saying, quote, "I think that's a great positive for the Indian side, something that they were concerned about and they're able to put forward through this meeting," end of quote. I see the Prime Minister of India saying that talks with Prime Minister Trudeau were fruitful. Our discussions focused on,
Mr.
and he
Minister,
goes into
I
a
guess
lot of detail.
I've read those as well. I guess what
the
I'm
coverage
curious to know-
is extremely
I'm
positive.
going to interrupt you both and say we are at the Public Safety Committee, not the International Relations Committee. So, Mr. Motts, you have about a minute left. If you could, again, tie your question somehow or another to estimates rather than as to what goes on in India.
Well, I mean, this is, to me, I think it's all related. The government has given us a budget for 2018, and I think it's open for debate, for conversation about the contents of that budget. And public safety and national security is certainly part of that. When a country is accused of doing something that they are denying, and we are perpetrating that theory, I would think that there's going to be considerable amount of energy and effort and resources placed on following up on fixing whatever has been already damaged. And I'm just kind of curious to know whether the Indian government has reached out to you, to our department, to our government, and to the responsible departments with respect to the Atwell affair.
The diplomatic and security and international affairs relationship between Canada and a whole range of other countries, including India, is large and dynamic and intricate, and communications are going back and forth in a very constructive way all of the time. I am unaware of any particular security communication over the course of the last number of days. But Canada has a very strong relationship with allies and partners all over the world, and we work very hard to maintain it. And when Canadian public servants provide information and advice, they do so with one thing in mind: what is best for the national interests of Canada.
The minister's idea briefly and mine seem to be divergent. Ms. DeBruzen, the final 5 minutes, we started a little late, so we'll finish with you.
Wonderful, thank you. Minister, I raised it in the House in question period once, and it's been an issue that's been very important to many people in my community, is this redress system and the passenger protect. And so I was hoping perhaps if you could help me with what the timelines might be as far as what we can expect for some changes to the passenger protect system.
It is, Mr. Brusen, a complex process, but we're going through it step by step. The legislative changes before Parliament right now, then come the regulations, then come rebuilding the computer system. Work will start this year, but it will take perhaps 3 years before it's fully implemented. But it's something that we want to make steady progress on every month going forward.
Thank you. You had actually been asked a question earlier about the RCMP, and you started talking about how the RCMP would be dealing with unfounded cases, which is something that's been the subject of quite a bit of scrutiny. And I was hoping perhaps you could give us a better sense of what will be the RCMP be doing, what is the funding in the budget going to do to help address those unfounded cases?
When this issue burst into the public domain some months ago, I was encouraged by the way a number of police forces responded to say This category of unfounded was too large, and we had to get to the bottom of it and find a better way of dealing with this whole issue, because no one who has been subject to sexual violence should feel in any way inhibited or limited in their ability to come forward, to be respected, to be treated in a serious manner, and not just brushed aside. Various police forces looked at how they were doing things, and they looked for international experience to how they might improve their conduct and their procedures and so forth. The RCMP has been particularly proactive, and there is additional money now in the budget to assist them in the work of making sure that all of this previous activity is properly reanalyzed, and that the right kind of procedures are put in place for the future, so that there can be perhaps different kind of reporting protocols, different ways in which the statistics are presented, so that no one has the sense or the reality of having been brushed aside. And because this is, I think, the last answer, and perhaps Dan Dubois' last opportunity, let me just ask the acting commissioner to make some observations on how the force has responded to this.
So thank you, Minister. So the force responded, as the Minister said, at the first instance, we pulled in the one-year files. We did a review of all our files. We had all our divisions actually reach into every one of the files that we had marked as unfounded, to make sure that the investigation was done properly, to make sure that when we did have one of the victims come forward, that we treat them with respect. Based on that, we were able to analyze that some of them were just misreported as unfounded. But where we thought there was gaps, and this is from Ottawa too, where we had an overview of this, we actually asked that they be re-looked at and reopened, and that we actually reached out back to the victim to ensure that we actually had done the full investigation. There's several of those investigations still ongoing on those files, to make sure that we did treat our individual respect. We're also incorporating some training around that, and how we approach our cases and how we approach our victims, so that we understand that it's a traumatic event for anybody, and that we approach them with the respect and courtesy that they need as they come forward.
And I want to thank you for that, because the training piece to me as a going forward basis, so that we don't keep perpetuating this problem, is essential. And so I'm happy to see that, and I would love to hear more as you move along with that project as to where you're at.
Some really interesting ideas have been forthcoming from the discussion. For example, are there ways of providing reporting avenues or mechanisms that don't involve a formal police procedure? Is there a way that you can better collect the data by providing alternative methods of reporting? Or in the way you report the data, is it founded or unfounded? Do you need a third category that says founded but not yet proven according to evidentiary standards and so forth, so that someone just doesn't automatically fall into the unfounded category because you don't have an answer yet?
Thank you.
There are various ways that we have to look at this, but I'm pleased with the momentum that has been built up across the country.
Thank you, Ms. DeBruze, and thank you, Minister, for your fulsome answons.
Point d'ordre, Monsieur le Président.
And
Point d'ordre.
I'm just about to suspend. Do you want before the suspension?
Point d'ordre, Monsieur le Président.
On a point of order, Minister Goodale, you've been in politics for a long time. I respect you a great deal, and I would imagine that you're very embarrassed by the Prime Minister's action with respect to the Atwell case.
Addressed to me, not
J'ai dit
you.
point d'ordre.
And I don't see it as a point of order. Hence, we suspend for a couple of minutes to let the minister leave. Thank you. If we could ask the panelists to return to their seats, please, and conversations to be taken outside. What's quorum, 5? Okay, we're back in session. I'm going to work on the assumption that Deputy Minister Brown has no opening statement to make. And so we will proceed to questioning. And the first is Monsieur Picard, who's not here. So we will then go to Mr. Spengelman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for remaining with us. I wanted to begin by circling back to a comment by the Minister earlier in which he wanted to give you, Mr. Dubois, the opportunity to speak about the cultural competency training and to elaborate a little bit more on that in the context of reconciliation. And I'm wondering if we could start by asking you to do that.
Thank you for the question. The training itself is really focused on approaching, based on our GBA Plus analysis, approaching individuals from any communities that we're able to approach with the respect they need. So that's really been our focus. As you know, we have bias-free policing policy in that, and it's trying to reinforce that throughout the organization to ensure that our members, as they deal with any type of issue, whether it be a sexual assault or any other issue, that we're approaching the members of our communities and our diverse communities with respect that we need. Part of that is also ensuring that as we recruit across the force, that we're recruiting more and more diversity into our organization, which you're hoping that at a certain point you get a tipping point and you become more diverse just as you're more and more exposed to our different communities. So that is really our main focus, and the training itself is really focused on our frontline police officers. So when they are approaching any type of situation, they're approaching it in such a way that it's in a respectful manner.
Can you give us an idea of what that training looks like and how it's actually delivered?
I would have to actually get the details back to you. I'm not the expert in that. I could get the committee the details on the training that we're developing.
Okay, thanks very much. Mr. Chair, my next question is back to the no-fly list. As you've heard earlier, there's a number of us who had concerns with it and a number of us who are very grateful for the budgetary commitment. Can we ask for a bit more detail on what has to happen next? So the Minister mentioned regulations and he mentioned a computer system. And of course the legislation of C-59, which is in the pipeline. What exactly would the regulations look at, and what would be the key components of that computer system, including its intersection presumably with other databases and concerns about privacy, and specifically concerns about protecting young Canadians who are, in large part, as we heard through testimony from the No-Fly List Kids advocacy group, caught by this system?
Sure, thank you. Maybe I'll start off just as the Minister mentioned, I'm responsible for the IT infrastructure. I currently have a system called the Interactive Advanced Passenger Information System that connects with airlines on the international travel side. So this is about expanding that pipeline, if you will, because now we're also going to be connecting with domestic air carriers. So we're the IT solution, and we'll be responsible for that conveyance of the information from the list back to airlines in terms of a board or no board decision.
And
in terms, waiting for the mic to come on, if not, okay. Okay, there it goes. And in terms of the regulatory process, there's a standard legislation drafts the broad framework, and then the regulatory components lay out the specific requirements, et cetera. And they will be, in point of fact, work has already begun on those. We're not waiting for the legislative process to be completed, in part because this is a priority for the government. It will set out, but there'll be a consultation process, as there always is in the regulatory process. It'll set out expectations in terms of the behavior of airlines, the information and how we expect them to interact with CBSA and Transport Canada. It'll be but as I say, it'll be a transparent process. There'll be consultations and an opportunity for the public and stakeholders, including airlines and others, to comment and respond.
And with respect to the software development, is there an existing system that's already either within government or the private sector that could be appropriated or remodeled for use as the passenger protect system, or is it something that has to be built from scratch? And if the latter, is it going to be open to a procurement process, or is that not yet determined?
That is not yet to be determined, although I would say that we do have this infrastructure already in place, and so it's about fitting it into all the domestic carriers, and as well the other side of it in terms of the SATA list, the secure travel list, and making sure that that connectivity is there with everybody.
Thanks very much for that. There is a budgetary appropriation in the estimates for 1.7 million and change for First Nations community policing services. I'm wondering if you could let the committee know what those funds will be used for.
Sure. Well, in general, this is a transfer to the RCMP, so I can let Dan get into the specifics, but you'll be aware that there was a significant investment by the government in terms of funding for First Nations policing program, and we'll be spending and working now in terms of renegotiating agreements with agreement holders, provinces, and First Nation communities. And so we're well on the way to implementing the development of agreements so that the additional funding for the significant reinvestment we'll get to communities as quickly as possible. We'll see better paid and more officers on the ground. But Dan, do you want to speak about the 1.7?
So the 1.7 really is to pay for the costs of policing in the communities, whether it be a tripartite agreement or not. So it's actually for frontline members on the road that we're delivering that service, that the funding was not there in the past. So it is to pay for that, and in some areas where it's grown, to pay for the extra officers that are on the ground. So it's actually the frontline service delivery piece that we're performing that. If you want real specifics, I'd have to look at my colleague, Denis Waters, who's joined us, who's our financial officer, to break down specifics.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for the question as well. Well, really of the 1.8, there's about $500,000, 500,000, which is for relating to the market adjustment for the pay for the members. And there's another about 800,000 of that. That's for the an economic increase for pay to the members. So about 75% of that relates to the pay increases that, so we had to, those pay increases and economic increases, it drove up the cost of policing. So about 75% is for that.
I've got very limited time, but it's not a fair question given the time constraint, but can you give us a very quick appreciation how much of an issue substance abuse and addiction are in the context of First Nations policing programs?
No, you're right. That's a broader discussion, and more than open to coming back to committee with some experts on that to have a discussion about that.
But it is definitely a factor.
There's a factor, I think, throughout all society. It's not just in First Nations communities. That is a factor throughout all society that we should be concerned about.
Thanks very much. I think that's my time, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Spangler and Mr. Palouse. 7 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for the RCMP, or SCS, on page 246 in French. They talk about $17 million for international event security. And I'd like to know, is it part of your, are you responsible for checking guest lists? The role of the RCMP is to, I'm going to explain in English.
Minister, that is our role, and part of that role, we have a process in place. I can't talk specific events and how we do it, but we do have a full process in place to look at where the individual is going, to understand what's happening overseas in that area, to understand what our posture would look like, including when inappropriate and when lists are shared to us, that we would do a vetting of lists and advise accordingly if there was issues there, so that we could change our security posture to ensure that our protectees are protected.
Donc, c'est naturellement la façon.
So, the procedure, and as soon as you've done your investigation, you convey the information to the PMO or the Privy Council, and they have to check it after. It depends on the event. And in terms of what we've done as research, yes, but we do that. I have a question for CBSA. Is there somebody from Border Services here? Yes? the budgets have increased for border control and for our SMP too. I'm talking about the immigration of illegals across the border, and the budget was tabled. It had an amount for that. What's happening now? How do you see things unfolding over the next 12 months when it comes to controlling illegal immigrants? Because the money is going to be used to build infrastructure. Is that what's going to happen? Or is it to pay salaries? How is this money going to be used?
The budget has proposed some additional funding for us to help manage irregular migration along with all of the partners that assist with that. For us, it's really about how we sort of apply our resources, particularly at Roxham Road at the Lacal border crossing to manage. That's the sort of major thoroughfare, if you will. And so we're looking forward to having access to those funds to help us continue to manage this.
Donc, est-ce que vous avez des mesures?
Do you have measures in place to control the situations? And people who decide to cross the border, do you have procedure? Are you going to make these the Lacal entry point a permanent structure for dealing with immigrants? I don't think that the intention was to initially make it a permanent point of entry. How do you view the Lacal entry point? Is there going to be an end to that?
Thank you for the question. No, there's no intention to turn Lacal into a permanent port of entry. As you may be aware, the RCMP is responsible for patrolling the border in between ports of entry. We are there co-located with them to help sort of manage the influx of asylum seekers. They are then brought to the port at Lacal for further processing because before anybody is released, we go through a full security screening process to make sure that there's no risk and determine their admissibility to come to Canada. So through consistent practice over the last year and beyond, we've got a pretty smooth running machine in terms of managing the volumes right now.
On a su que normalement, ça prend minimum 8.
Normally, it takes 8 hours to register someone who's crossing the border. And in August and September of last year, given the flow of people, I think that this was brought down to 2 hours. Have you been given additional budgets so that you have greater capacity in order to have more time to really focus on the processing?
We refined our processing with partners, including Immigration, Refugee and Citizenship Canada, the RCMP, and others. Perhaps I could turn to Jacques Cloutier, who's my Vice President of Operations and has been deeply involved in this, to give you some more details.
Oui, avec plaisir. Merci pour votre question.
Thank you for your question. I'd like to clarify at the outset that we have not reduced security at the border. So the processing time you refer to, it's between the risk assessment, the security assessment, and we deal also with the RCMP, and that their system takes a few days as well before we are given responsibility. What has changed with our process, it's the second part, that is the acceptability or eligibility of the applicant. And that part of the process is adjourned, and it's done outside of Lacal. This takes 5 to 6 hours, so nothing's changed with that. We are really emphasizing the security of Canadians and the security of the applicants, but we have not reduced the security controls in any way. My information is that the applicants are checked, and then they're told that they're not eligible as asylum people and as asylum seekers, and they're asked to return to their countries. A lot of the people just escape and get lost. What kind of measures are you taking to avoid this situation from occurring?
Aware of anybody escaping or getting lost.
Actuellement, l'information qu'on a.
Well, according to our information, about a minimum 10% of the people who are turned down decide to no longer not show up for the second meeting, and so they've gone AWOL. Can I have information on that? Once again, to answer your question, I think you have to make a distinction between people who are going through the process and your costs, where people don't show up for the interview. They don't show up for us, or they don't show up for the at the commission or the board. In that case, these people have already undergone a security interview, and these people are people we have trust in, and we understand the risk they represent. These people, once they make an application, are given a conditional agreement, which depends on the analysis of their application. In this case, these people would be registered on our registered, and a warrant would be issued for them, and then we try to find these people. But to put things in proper context, in our opinion, there are not a lot of people that represent a huge security risk. Mr. Dubé, 7 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
About the ion scanner issue that has been before this committee. We had Mothers Offering Mutual Support, moms, and others testify. There was word of a report that was supposed to come out in January. I don't know if that report exists, or if it is, it just hasn't been made public yet. I don't know if we can get an update on that.
Yes, actually. There was a review actually that was conducted to assess the use of ion scanners and their reliability. As part of the review, actually the validity of the tool was confirmed, and we identified areas that required enhancements. There was a bulletin actually that was issued in October of 2017. As you know, the ion scanner is only one piece of information. So it's to actually be able to detect trace amounts of drugs. Even if you test positive on the ion scanner, then there has to be another assessment.
I understand that. I apologize for interrupting, but my time is limited. But I'm a little confused by that response, because the bulletin is in October, and you're saying that there's now, the review has determined the validity. Is there a report that we can have access to that would demonstrate that? Because that's what I was referred to by the minister in his response to a petition I tabled in the House.
What I have is that was a recommendation that was made by the the Office of the Correctional Investigator, and a letter has been provided to his office, again outlining what the review, what the results of the review were.
So can there be an undertaking to provide those results to the committee?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. L'autre question que j'avais concerne...
Yeah, my other question with respects to Bill C-59, the government has decided to proceed to appeal a BC decision. I understand that you can't comment because this matters before the courts, but is the department thinking of changing the legislative process, or do you know whether the bill, I don't know if you're going to be able to answer that question.
I think in consultation with the correctional services, the government determined that as a result of essentially the two decisions, one in Ontario and one in BC, the requirement to clarify, because in some ways the decisions take different, the two court decisions take different positions. So that's the basis of the decision to make the appeal. In terms of further legislative change, I would say that the government continues to assess the situation really carefully, and is looking at, is continually looking at ways to improve the legislative framework around administrative segregation. And I'll let Anne jump in if she wants to add anything.
Well, certainly for us at CSC, it's something that we constantly look at. As you know, there's been a number of measures that were put in place. One in particular was, and as the Senior Deputy Commissioner, I chaired the long-term SEG committee, and we reviewed the cases of certain offenders that had spent so many days in SEG, that had cumulative placements in SEG or a certain number of cumulative days. Certainly, all the regional deputy commissioners are involved or assistant deputy commissioners. And we have full discussions on each of the cases to see what alternatives exist to alleviate their SEG status.
Merci. Dans le budget, il y a des...
In the budget, there are amounts that are earmarked for the Lesage Airport to implement pre-control measures. I don't know if you can answer my question. You're from CBSA, but will this money, is that the full amount that's going to be used to put in the pre-clearance measures in the airports, or is it up to the airports to pay a portion of the bill?
It's currently structured right now for pre-clearances that it's a cost recovered kind of situation. So if the airports want to pursue a pre-clearance approach, then they have to pay for those services.
In that case, what's the... there is money in the budget that appeared in the budget. What's that money for then?
In terms of us, it's to actually implement the agreement in terms of what we would have to do for all of the training and the expansion of pre-clearance into the other modes. So currently, pre-clearance is in air mode, and it has been for over 50 years. This expands it to land, rail, and marine. And so for us, it's about getting ready for that expansion of how we would pursue pre-clearance opportunities in these other modes.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to go back to the drafting error that the minister referenced. I didn't get a chance to ask him this question, but I'm just wondering if someone is able to explain to me what legally the threshold of likely would entail and how that's defined currently in law.
Aaron, do you want to take a turn?
Yeah, I'll take a try or a stab at it as well. Merci pour la question. Je vais vous répondre en anglais.
Thank you for a question, but I'll respond in English.
To be equipped to respond to any urgent threat with all of the tools that we have at our disposal, and ensuring that the proposed data set legislation is responsive to exigent circumstances is paramount. In the draft bill, exigency is clearly defined to include preserving the life or safety of an individual or to acquire perishable intelligence of significant value. On the matter of any possible amendments, I would defer to the minister in this committee. This is appropriately a matter for Parliament to decide.
I'm just wondering, so no one can tell me then, because the minister made those comments about the word likely.
Let me take a stab at it. A little outside the scope of today's conversation, but we'll try and be as constructive and helpful.
Is right. The minister brought it in.
I'm fully aware.
Yeah.
There is there are other elements of the Act, of the CSIS Act, and that talk about the likely threshold. In the drafting of the provisions around exigent circumstances, and I think I'm getting this right, the drafting around exigent circumstances, will was used in error, and it's likely is used elsewhere in the CSIS Act. And it's for similar circumstances. And so I think it's a well understood threshold. We can provide more information to the committee to explain the difference between the will and likely threshold. The problem is if it stays at the will threshold, it's impossible to use because will requires 100% certainty, as the minister described.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Dubé. And I think, we do want to go back on that. That is probably far more significant than the members necessarily appreciate at this time. With that, I see that Mr. Picard is back.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. I got
7 minutes, please.
Sorry for my delay. I got stuck with a number of Canadians, very interested Canadians with microphones. Ma première question.
My first question is for the Correctional Service. The prison farms, prison incarcérale,
Prison Farm, je comprends que le programme.
I do understand that the program came to a halt a few years ago. Could you briefly give me the reasons why this program was shut down, and perhaps a comment on the results we obtained from this bill? I think people are curious as to why we want to reopen these prison farms. Thank you for your question. When there was a strategic review was conducted a number of years ago, we took a look at all of our programs, and the decision was taken at the time to shut down the farms. The government now, as the minister announced, these farms are going to reopen.
Will be able to keep offenders productively occupied. They are going to learn some of the soft skills like, getting up, having a routine during the day. It's going to be good for their rehabilitation. Those are transferable skills when they get into the community. There's going to be on-the-job training. At this point, it was just announced in the budget, so CSC has to work with the Department of Finance and Treasury Board to get the details of the funding and the impact on its day-to-day operations. But
Est-ce que la vision du ministère?
Given the anticipated results that you have just explained, obviously there will be a very positive impact in helping the individuals. Is it the desire to open one farm, or are you hoping that this will lead to a series of other projects? Because I think that in the past there were more than one. There was more than one farm. Yes, in the past there were farms in 3 regions, if I'm not mistaken. But for the time being, we have a project for one in Ontario. But in the medium term, are you going to try perhaps to, based on the Ontario project, open others? We're just focusing on Ontario for the time being. I have another question regarding the RCMP, the integrity program. I refer to the colleague, the point raised by my colleague about irregular immigration. And we had to move a lot of resources around because of changing needs. We had the terrorist threat, but the terrorist threat has not really increased since 2014. It's just rated as being average. But that did require change in resources. They had to be shuffled around. What is the first objective of this integrity review? Is it to look at the relevance of the programs or to better define the way that the resources are distributed? The review itself, that's a very good question. As the minister said, the purpose of the review is to look at all of the programs, all of our staff, how we're going to implement federal policing.
In the organization, but what's the best way of going about it? And, even questions about what should we be in? What should we be doing as an organization? So on the federal piece with the integrity money that you see in here, that is to allow us to continue doing certain activities while we're developing our full departmental review submission for our minister to take forward in the fall. So what you're seeing in the supplement C's is actually where you'll see things like this. There's money going towards our recruiting, money towards our first generation, so we can hire more police officers to fill some of our vacancies, so we can release our seasoned police officers over to the federal duties at where they should be. So that's a full review now is ongoing, with a response to be in the fall to the government.
Est-ce qu'il y a un impact sur la formation qui va se faire à Regina?
Will there be any change in the training that's provided in Regina? The reputation of the RCMP is excellent abroad. The quality of our training, the flexibility of our forces are strong. But the problem is that given that we're well-trained, given that we're flexible, they're moved around everywhere. and therefore there is a lack of corporate experience within the unit. How do you? That's a very good question. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, but that's the whole challenge of federal policing. How do we do federal policing?
In the future, may not all be police officers. You're going to see a blend of different civilian employees working with us, public servants working with us, because the world has changed so dramatically. You see cybercrime, cyber terrorism, you see all that going virtual. We have to have a new force, new force generation model, and that's exactly what we're looking at. Is what is a right blend. We have great training at Depot. It's a world-class training, I would say, but we may look at training other places too, where you get some of the basics at Depot, but there may be some direct entries that we're looking for somebody that has a certain skill set right into our organization. Well, how can we train them up quickly from a federal perspective to allow them to deploy onto investigation? And we're open to everything, and that is something that Gilles Michaud is leading on our behalf. It started under Commissioner Paulson, and right now is to really develop that model.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Picard. Before I go to Mr. Calkins for 5 minutes, I just wanted to say to colleagues, my intention is to reserve the final 10 minutes approximately for clause by clause and a vote on the budget. So I'm going to have 2 rounds, starting with Mr. Calkins and then Ms. DeBruzen after that.
Thank you, Chair. My first question is for Mr. Dubeau. Would it be fair to say that every one of our embassies or high commissions around the world would be staffed with an RCMP officer?
No.
Most of them would be staffed with an RCMP officer?
We have liaison officers in many of our areas. I would have to actually ask our federal police to provide the details of where they are, and then we could provide that to committee.
So I've traveled a little bit in my role as a parliamentarian, and virtually every embassy or high commission I've been to has an RCMP officer present responsible for security of the embassy and so on. That RCMP officer would be involved in the chain of command of the RCMP and not in the chain of command at the High Commission or the embassy. Is that correct? And they would have a working relationship in concert with the staff, the global affairs. Is that correct? How would communications happen, official communications happen between the RCMP officer at an embassy or High Commission and the staff at global affairs? Would that all be well documented?
I would have, you know what, since still on my forte to police operations on the federal side, I would have to come back to you on that and actually ask my deputy to provide you to write the details.
And of course, when the Prime Minister is not on the Hill or in the parliamentary precinct, the RCMP is responsible for the security and safety of the Prime Minister. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And of course, those RCMP would also fall within the command and control structure of the entire RCMP organization. Could you expand to me or to this committee what the nature of the relationship would be between the RCMP officers that might be posted at an embassy or a high commission and the RCMP commission that are assigned to the safety and security of the Prime Minister when the Prime Minister is traveling abroad?
So that's where you get the integrated approach where the liaison officers, one of our liaison officers, would be part of our chain of command. So when we know our Prime Minister is going to a certain area, that is one of the points of contact we have, so that the individual not only works with the embassy and government affairs, they also work with the local authorities to understand what's happening on the ground. And that would be fed back to our national headquarters to assist us with our planning process, would be fed back to our policing operations and our protective detail to ensure that we have the right posture on the ground.
At what point, if anything, was found by global affairs or the CSIS or whatever the case might be, if something was flagged, at what point or what would be the criteria by which something would be sent to the National Security Advisor?
At this point, you're asking me to go into, so let's say I can't be specific.
No, I understand.
At the point, we would identify, as soon as we would notice any type of issue, we would then brief up accordingly. We would brief up accordingly as soon as, so you can't say what point, as soon as we'd find there's an issue there, we would brief up.
Is there any scenario by which briefing up would stop within the confines of the RCMP and not get to the National Security Advisor?
But, you know, from my best recollection, my briefings, we would brief up when appropriate.
Okay. Mr. Robertson, as an agency, CSIS is confined within doing its operations within Canada, of course, sharing intelligence with our allies around the world. Without giving away any secrets, would it be fair to say that from time to time, CSIS agents do travel to our high commissions or embassies around the world? If you can't answer the question, I'm fine with that.
For operational reasons, yeah, I would prefer not.
No, that's fine. I don't want to put anybody at any risk, and I don't want to certainly do anything to jeopardize the national security of our country. Could you expand to me then at what point a relationship where with the RCMP and sharing of information without sharing the information, how that would work if somebody at an RCMP officer, for example, at a high commission or an embassy would receive information from CSIS and vice versa if something were to be flagged? How would that happen?
Well, as part of its mandate, CSIS provides security-related advice to the Government of Canada, to various departments. That would include the Department of Foreign Affairs or
So that would
Global
you-
Affairs Canada. And so that process would involve, that information being passed to Global Affairs Canada, and then the contact with their representatives abroad would happen by Global Affairs Canada.
Would it be fair and reasonable to say that the agency that that CSIS would from time to time share information with Global Affairs Canada that wouldn't share with the RCMP?
It would depend on the nature of the information.
Okay, so it's a situational.
It's a case by case, yes.
And can you describe to me the nature of the relationship or sharing of information, or what thresholds by which information would be shared between CSIS and the National Security Advisor?
Well, again, and depends on the nature of the information. Again, it's not everything that's briefed up, obviously. It's at the discretion of our director generally as to what gets briefed up.
Okay. I would also like to ask you a question about how information is shared with the Prime Minister's office. Is any information shared directly between the Prime Minister's office and CSIS or the RCMP?
We would brief up into the National Security Advisor.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Carr. Ms. DeBruzen.
Thank you. We talked briefly before about First Nations policing. So I was really interested in what's in the supplementary estimates as to improving Indigenous services and services to our Indigenous population. If I can start with Corrections Canada, is there anything in here, I was just going through your sheet here, that would deal with the allocation of funds for initiatives for programming for Indigenous people in corrections at the moment? We have been studying that. So is there anything that deals with tailoring programs to Indigenous offenders?
I'd have to get the details of that.
All right. Maybe if I can kind of work it down the line, the RCMP, you spoke about First Nations policing. Is there anything else that is in the supplementary estimates that deals with improving services for Indigenous people and making them have more confidence in the services that you provide?
I would have to ask us for line by line. I'd have to turn over to my Chief Financial Officer.
Oh, sorry, from here, what I see in the subs, the $1.8 million that in the subsidies that are added upon, but that, like I was referring to the gentleman earlier, most of it is to account for the market adjustment to the pay rate and economic increase to the pay raise to the members.
All right. Okay. Why don't I try a slightly different tack, and I'll go back to that maybe in a second. For the department, I saw that there is funding for the gender-based violence strategy. Can you tell me where is that at? What are the programs and what's being developed under that line?
The strategy is more broadly a horizontal initiative led by Status of Women Canada. So if you want the full scope of a strategy, I'd encourage you to invite our colleague Gina Wilson to come in and give you a full briefing. But in terms of the elements for public safety, there's 1.3 million per year, 6 million over 5 years and 1.3 million per year. It's going to be used to fund primarily supports to address child sexual exploitation by increasing the capacity of the Canadian Centre for Child Protection to help them manage reports of online child sexual exploitation that it receives. As well, the centre runs a well-known online crawler, Nacroid, I think is what it's called, right? And so this is a really important initiative that sort of scans the internet and then informs service providers that they have illegal, it's not inappropriate, illegal content, and then the service providers almost invariably take it down. So it's a very effective, very cost-effective investment in beginning to tackle this issue.
And how would we be able to get more information about how that, was it
We
inaccurate
can find, I'd be happy through the chair to share more background with the committee.
That might be helpful for us to just have a better sense. And I saw that in the budget, there's also been money set aside for a hotline in respect of human trafficking. Would that be kind of the next step on this gender-based violence strategy that's...
Well, I wouldn't think it was as I say, the gender-based, the whole question around gender-based violence is part of a horizontal initiative.
Yeah.
Human trafficking affects both men and women and children, and so there is a gender lens to it. There's no question it affects, I think our data shows it affects more women than men. And in some ways differently. The nature of the trafficking is different depending on gender. So this is, again, a relatively small targeted investment to create, to support the tip line so that people can identify where people are at risk, and then stakeholders can take steps to provide supports.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. DeBruzen, and that does conclude our questioning of the witnesses. I want to thank each and every one of you for your contribution. And then I want to go to now the vote. Do I have unanimous consent to vote on all items at one time? Okay. First of all, the vote on the supplementary estimate C. Shall vote on supplementary C pass?
On division.
On division. The second vote is on interim estimates. Again, do I have unanimous consent to vote all at once? Those in favor? On division. Okay, we're on a roll here. The third item, which we'd normally go in camera, but I don't really see the point unless people really are keen on this, and that is the request for the travel budget in order to be able to go on the Indigenous study. This would be visits to Dacona, Saskatoon, Medicine Hat. You've got it in front of you. Those in favor? Or any debate? Should be with your package of stuff. I just want to make sure that everybody's seen it. Those in favor? Yes. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
You good? Matthew?
Still
hang
no-
on. So I just want to make sure it's on the table. Somebody moved in favor of it. Michelle, debate.
Just a quick question. Dates still haven't been determined. We're still looking at spring 2018.
That's right.
Okay.
Any other? Those in favor? Opposed? Unanimous. Thank you. And now the subcommittee is going to meet, but we're not meeting in this room, apparently. We are meeting. So with that, we're adjourned.
Thank you.